They don't push you because they hate you. They push you because you allow survival without consequence. This video is not about anger. It is about why people continue until you collapse, why your patience becomes an invitation, and why the moment you finally break is a moment they feel justified. If you've ever asked yourself, why do people keep going even when they see I'm hurting? This is a problem we are going to solve. People like to believe that pain caused by others is usually the result of misunderstanding, poor communication, or emotional blindness. This belief is comforting because it preserves the idea that the world is largely benign and that cruelty is an exception rather than a mechanism. But human behavior does not operate on comfort. It operates on observation, repetition, and outcome. When someone continues to push you, provoke you, exhaust you, or burden you long after the damage is visible, it is no longer ignorance. It is awareness paired with calculation. Human beings are deeply attentive to patterns of response. Long before words are spoken, others study how you react to pressure. They notice whether your face tightens or relaxes when crossed. They observe whether you explain yourself, defend yourself, or remain silent. They track how quickly you recover, how often you forgive, how easily you return to normal. None of this is accidental. Suffering that is visible yet unanswered becomes information, and information is power. When you endure quietly, your pain is registered not as a signal to stop, but as proof that continuation is possible. The human mind does not instinctively recoil from another's suffering unless it carries a consequence. Sympathy is fragile. It dissolves the moment endurance appears infinite. Once others realize that your suffering does not alter your behavior toward them, they subconsciously downgrade its importance. Pain that changes nothing becomes irrelevant. There's a quiet shift that happens at this stage. At first, they hesitate. They test lightly. A small disrespect, a delayed response, a selfish demand. When nothing changes, hesitation fades. The next push comes with less guilt, then less awareness. Eventually, your suffering becomes part of the environment, like background noise, not because they are evil, but because the mind adapts quickly to what does not resist. This is why repeated harm is rarely impulsive. It is reinforced. Each time someone crosses a line and faces no resistance, the crossing is psychologically rewarded. The absence of consequence is interpreted as consent, even if no such consent was ever given. Silence is not read as dignity. It is read as tolerance. And tolerance invites continuation. People do not need to consciously think, I am hurting this person and I will continue. The process is more insidious. They think, this is how it has always been. Familiarity replaces morality. The longer something persists, the more natural it feels. Over time, even blatant injustice begins to feel justified simply because it is established. Your suffering becomes accidental only in your own interpretation, because you assume others experience your inner world. They do not. They experience outcomes. They experience whether your presence becomes colder, whether access is reduced, whether demands are refused. If none of these happen, the mind concludes that the situation is sustainable, and what is sustainable will be used. There is also a darker layer beneath this behavior. Many people carry unexpressed frustration, envy, and resentment. They search for places to release it safely. A person who absorbs pressure without retaliation becomes an ideal outlet, not because they deserve it, but because they allow it. Suffering, in this sense, becomes functional. It serves the emotional economy of others. The most dangerous illusion is believing that visible pain will automatically awaken conscience. In reality, conscience is fragile and selective. It is strongest when consequences threaten self-image, reputation, or comfort. When harming you costs nothing, conscience sleeps. When harming you provides relief, dominance, or emotional discharge, it is encouraged. This is why people often push the hardest just before you break. By then, your endurance has taught them that escalation is safe. Each prior moment of restraint has quietly trained them. They are not surprised by your pain. They are surprised only when pain finally transforms into resistance. Your suffering was never invisible. It was evaluated, normalized, and integrated into how others relate to you. And the longer it persisted without disruption, the more it ceased to be seen as suffering at all and became simply the price you were expected to pay for existing in their orbit. Endurance is often praised as virtue, framed as maturity, patience, or emotional intelligence. From childhood onward, people are taught that bearing discomfort quietly is a sign of strength, that restraint is noble, that reacting is weakness. But this moral framing collapses under real human behavior. In practice, endurance is rarely interpreted as strength. It is interpreted as accessibility. The one who endures becomes the one who can be used without resistance. When someone continues to tolerate pressure, disrespect, or emotional weight, the mind of the other does not register sacrifice. It registers availability. The internal logic is simple and unconscious. If this person truly could not accept this treatment, they would stop it. Because they do not, the treatment must be acceptable. In this way, endurance is silently translated into permission, even when no permission was ever intended. This is why people escalate. Not out of sudden cruelty, but out of learned certainty. Each moment of endurance reinforces a belief that the boundary does not exist. Boundaries that are never enforced are not experienced as boundaries at all. They become suggestions, easily ignored and quickly forgotten. Over time, what once felt excessive becomes standard, and what once felt wrong becomes normal. There is a psychological comfort in knowing how far one can go with someone. Uncertainty produces restraint. Certainty removes it. When your endurance eliminates uncertainty, others relax into their impulses. They speak more carelessly. They demand more boldly. They take more time, more energy, more patience. Not because they consciously intend harm, but because the absence of resistance feels like permission to proceed. The tragedy is that endurance often comes from hope. The hope that understanding will eventually arise. The hope that kindness will be recognized. The hope that if you remain calm long enough, the other person will self-correct. But human behavior does not work on hope. It works on feedback. And endurance provides the wrong kind of feedback. It communicates that the cost of continuing is low, and the reward of unloading remains available. Endurance also distorts how others see your capacity. When you carry weight silently, people assume you are built to carry it. Your limits are redefined without your consent. What once would have been considered unreasonable becomes expected. And when expectation replaces gratitude, exploitation is already underway. There's an unspoken hierarchy in all interactions. Those who enforce limits are perceived as solid, while those who endure without protest are perceived as flexible. Flexibility, over time, becomes a weakness in the eyes of those seeking advantage. Not because flexibility is inherently weak, but because it can be bent without snapping. And what bends repeatedly becomes something others lean on. People rarely ask themselves whether they should stop. They ask whether they need to. Endurance answers that question for them. It tells them there is no urgency, no risk, no reason to adjust. In this way, endurance becomes an invisible agreement you never signed. The most damaging aspect of this dynamic is how it rewrites the story afterward. When you finally resist, you are no longer seen as someone setting a boundary. You are seen as someone breaking a pattern. And breaking patterns feels like betrayal to those who benefited from them. They do not think, I went too far. They think, you changed. Your endurance trained them to believe access was permanent. It created a version of you in their mind that existed to absorb without consequence. When you disrupt that image, they experience loss, not accountability. And loss breeds resentment. This is why restraint without enforcement is not neutral. It actively shapes how others treat you. Every moment of endured pressure teaches people how to behave toward you tomorrow, and when endurance becomes habitual, permission becomes assumed, until stopping no longer feels like a choice to them but an unjustified interruption to a system they believe you agreed to maintain. Every interaction between human beings contains an unspoken negotiation. It is not negotiated with words, but with pressure. Long before respect is declared, it is tested. People do not ask where your limits are. They move toward them and watch what happens. This is not always conscious or malicious. It is instinctive. The mind seeks clarity, and clarity comes from reaction. At the beginning, the test is subtle, a delay in response. A dismissive tone masters humor, a request that slightly overreaches. These are probes, not attacks. They are designed to extract information. How much resistance exists here? How much friction will I encounter if I proceed? Power does not announce itself. It reveals itself only when challenged. If resistance appears early, the test ends quickly. The mind categorizes a person as solid, defined, costly to push. Respect does not need to be earned after that. It is calculated. But when resistance is absent, curiosity deepens. The next test is stronger, more obvious, less polite. Each escalation is a search for the point where pushback begins. This is why people often say, "I didn't think it was a big deal." To them, it truly wasn't, because the big deal would have been resistance. Without it, there is no signal that a line has been crossed. The human psyche is not guided by abstract ethics in daily interaction. It is guided by feedback loops. Pressure is applied, reaction is measured, adjustment follows. Power is not about domination at first. It is about certainty. People want to know where they stand in relation to you. Are you someone who redirects force or someone who absorbs it? Are you an obstacle or a surface? This knowledge allows them to relax into a role. And once roles are established, they harden. When someone realizes that pushing you yields no resistance, a quiet conclusion forms. Not spoken aloud, but deeply felt. I am above this boundary. I can go further. This is not arrogance as much as it is psychological economy. The mind prefers a path of least resistance. Power flows where it is not blocked. The danger lies in the fact that limits are not assumed to exist. They are proven. If you do not demonstrate them, they are treated as theoretical. People do not behave based on what you feel internally. They behave based on what happens externally. Internal discomfort that never surfaces is invisible, and invisible limits do not shape behavior. Over time, this testing becomes less about discovery and more about maintenance. Once power is located, it must be confirmed. Small acts of pressure continue, not to learn, but to ensure the hierarchy remains intact. This is why some people seem to provoke you even when there is no benefit. The benefit is reassurance. As long as you do not push back, the structure remains stable. There's also fear beneath this behavior. People test limits to avoid being vulnerable themselves. Knowing they can push you means they do not have to guard themselves around you. They do not have to measure their words or restrain their impulses. Your lack of resistance becomes their sense of safety. When you finally resist after a long period of endurance, the reaction is often disproportionate. Shock, anger, accusations. This is not because your resistance is wrong, but because it disrupts an established power map. The mind hates uncertainty, and your resistance reintroduces it. In that moment, they are not responding to what you just did. They are responding to the collapse of what they believed. The belief that they knew where you stood. The belief that pushing you was safe. The belief that power had already been located. This is why people push until something breaks. Not because they want destruction, but because they are searching for confirmation. And when confirmation never comes, escalation feels justified, logical, even necessary, until resistance finally appears or the structure collapses under the weight of what was never meant to be carried indefinitely. When pressure continues long after empathy should have intervened, it is no longer about ignorance or habit. It is about fulfillment. There is something gained when another person finally breaks, and that gain is psychological. Human beings are not only driven by survival and comfort, but by the need to resolve inner tension. Breaking someone else often becomes a way to avoid confronting one's own contradictions. Many people carry unacknowledged guilt, insecurity, or resentment. These emotions seek an outlet. Confronting them internally would require responsibility and self-examination, which is painful and destabilizing. It is far easier to project them outward. When you become the one who absorbs pressure, you become a convenient container for what they refuse to face within themselves. The act of pushing you is not random. It provides relief. Each time you endure without retaliation, it confirms to them that their behavior is acceptable, that their inner discomfort can be released without consequence. But relief fades quickly. Like all unprocessed emotion, it demands repetition. So the pressure increases, not because you deserve it, but because the relief requires escalation. When you finally break, something crucial happens in their mind. The discomfort shifts from them to you. Your emotional reaction becomes a focal point. Anger, withdrawal, collapse, or tears all serve the same function. They allow the other person to reinterpret the situation. Now the story is no longer about what they did. It is about how you responded. This is where justification is born. Your breaking gives them language. You are too sensitive. You are unstable. You cannot handle pressure. These narratives protect their self-image. They no longer need to question their behavior because your reaction has provided them with an explanation that places the problem inside you. There is also a deeper satisfaction in seeing another person break. It creates a sense of control. Control reassures those who feel powerless elsewhere in their lives. Watching someone bend confirms that force works, that persistence dominates restraint, that their will can override another's limits. This does not require conscious cruelty. It only requires unresolved insecurity. In many cases, people are not aiming to destroy you completely. They are aiming to locate the point where they can feel superior without consequence. The breaking point marks that location. Once found, it becomes a reference. They know how far they can go. They know what it takes to unbalance you. This knowledge becomes leverage. After the break, the dynamic often changes subtly. They may appear calmer, even kinder, not out of remorse, but because the tension has been released. The psychological need has been satisfied. For now, until it builds again. This is why apologies after breaking someone often feel hollow. They are not motivated by understanding, but by closure. The cycle feels complete to them. Pressure, endurance, breaking, relief. The system resets. And unless something fundamentally changes, it will repeat. The most disturbing aspect of this dynamic is how normalized it becomes. People convince themselves that pushing others is simply how relationships work, that resilience means enduring anything, that those who break were never strong enough. These beliefs allow the cycle to continue without moral friction. Your breaking is not an accident in this process. It is a release valve. It allows others to remain intact by transferring instability onto you. And as long as this mechanism remains unchallenged, your suffering will continue to serve a function far more valuable to them than your well-being, reinforcing a pattern where your pain is not a signal to stop, but a necessary step in preserving the psychological balance they refuse to disturb.